Hello, my name is Olof Skog. I am the European Union's ambassador to the UN here in New York. This is EU Talks. The goal of the UN is to improve the daily lives of citizens around the world. But the UN is a complicated place. In the EU Talks series, we will openly discuss the UN's work and how it delivers. Every month, EU Talks will engage with diplomats, UN officials, but also with experts, journalists, activists, creating what I hope will be a valuable space, especially for young people. Most people working in and around the UN represent a country or an organization. However, I believe that each of us also have a personal responsibility to find the solutions and to meet the expectations of people around the world. Along those lines, I will be asking some pretty hard questions to all of our guests. Welcome to EU Talks.
Hi everybody, my name is Silvio Gonzato. I am the Deputy Head of the EU Delegations to the United Nations in New York, and this is EU Talks. We want to dedicate today's episodes of EU Talks to the nuclear proliferation file. This is something that is very topical today here in New York because we have a number of diplomats that have come from all over the world to discuss these issues. And we also have two guests with us. One is the EU Special Envoy for Non-Proliferation and Disarmament, Marjolein van Delen, coming from Brussels. But we also have here a young blogger who is also a digital management expert, Selma Shahibi-Skow, who are going to help us delve into very important topics. But first I would like to start with you, Marjolein, and I'd like you to explain to us what is a EU Special Envoy for Non-Proliferation and Disarmament, and why are you here today?
All right, well, thank you very much, Silvio, and thanks for having me here. My role as EU Special Envoy is to promote EU positions on non-proliferation and disarmament in multilateral fora, mostly, and sometimes also in bilateral discussions with third states. So being envoy means one travels a lot to international meetings, and I'm in New York this month for the Non-Proliferation Treaty Review Conference, which is one of our very biggest events.
Thank you. And this review conference, I guess it's an important moment in monitoring the functioning of the treaty. But before we go into that, I think we have here Selma, who, like me, probably doesn't know much about the treaty itself. So, Selma, would you like to ask a few questions to Marjolein about how the treaty works?
As a result of disarmament, we've seen a reduction of nuclear warheads to 10,000 on Earth, which is about 1/5 of what it was about 50 years ago when the Non-Proliferation Treaty was put into effect. And so in that context, who is it that actually monitors that the Non-Proliferation Treaty is respected, and what are the consequences if it isn't?
It's a very good question, Selma. Thanks for that. But to answer that, I have to take a few steps back to explain what it is that the Non-Proliferation Treaty does. Because it basically does three things. One is to prevent from new states acquiring nuclear weapons. So it's the non-proliferation aspect. The other one is the disarmament aspect, the one that you mentioned, to get less nuclear weapons in the hand or in the possession of the nuclear weapon states. And while constraining the side of nuclear weapons, it tries to promote the peaceful use of nuclear energy. And with that you can think of power generation, but you can also think of medical applications. Anything with nuclear isotopes or radio is in that basket. Disarmament has been a very important pillar, we call it, of the NPT. A very important one for the EU. The treaty now exists for just over 50 years. We had been supposed to meet 2 years ago when it was exactly 50 years. And in those 50 years, we have indeed seen this really great reduction in nuclear weapons by the nuclear weapon states, especially the two that have the largest arsenals, Russia and the US. Now, in the last decade, this decline has stalled a little bit, And we've also seen that some countries, especially China, is increasing its nuclear arsenal. So what we're here to discuss in this meeting is how we can try and stay on a track where we decrease these nuclear arsenals of the nuclear weapon states. The NPT is a short treaty. It's 2 pages, 3 pages. So to implement it, we have built a lot of other instruments, what we call the architecture. And on disarmament, for example, we have the Nuclear Test Ban Treaty that prohibits nuclear testing, so that prevents nuclear weapon states to test new weapons. And we've been promoting a fissile material treaty, which would limit the amount of fissile material that one can use in a nuclear weapon. That hasn't started yet, but for the EU, it's important to push for that. So we're actually pushing on a lot of different lines, to come back to your question. And what we're doing here in New York these days is discussing how that's going, looking back for the past 5 years, maybe even 50 years, because it's a bit of an anniversary, but then also looking at how we can improve performance in the next 5 years or the next 50 years in the future.
Can I ask you a question though? Because you said because of COVID, the review conference had to be postponed. We had to wait 2 years. Yeah. In these 2 years, many things have happened, and unfortunately not very good ones. So the international context and the geopolitical context in which we work has considerably worsened. And we, here in New York, at least we feel this tension, between blocs, let's say. How is this going to impact the review conference, and what are your expectations?
Imagine what would have happened without this treaty. How many countries would now have nuclear weapons that could devastate the world many times over? So that is our primary focus. But of course we need to deal with a number of issues. One of the key ones is North Korea. They are not party to this treaty, and they're on a very strong track in their nuclear weapons program. So this is something that we're discussing internally, how to stop that and how to prevent that from escalating. Another big concern is the Iran nuclear file. Because of the NPT and this architecture that I talked about after Selma's question, the implementation of non-proliferation is through inspections that are done by the IAEA. That's actually also under this treaty. And as you know, there have been some questions about that in the Iran file. So that will be another issue that we need to see how we reflect that in this setting, and how we improve those safeguards. And then, of course, we have war going on in Europe. We've seen the Russian aggression on Ukraine. Something we've addressed in the debate in the first few days, because that has a link to the NPT. And that is because of 2 things. One is because we've seen when this war started that President Putin has threatened use of nuclear weapons. Well, that is, of course, something that's really unacceptable to us. The other aspect is that Ukraine had signed what's called the Budapest Memorandum, which was an agreement through which Ukraine would let the nuclear weapons that were on its soil when the Soviet Union disappeared, send those weapons back to Russia. But in return, it would not be attacked by Russia. And it was. And I said 2, but I mean 3, because the other issue that we have currently is that some of Ukraine's nuclear power plants and nuclear facilities are being attacked. So there's a risk of nuclear safety and security. And that is also part of the architecture that I just mentioned. So it's also something that we will talk about.
In preparation for today's talks, I was surprised to learn that nuclear technology is used in all aspects of our lives. So from medical treatment to food storage, and even used in things such as preservation of the environment. And so in that context, I want to ask, how does the EU and how is the peaceful use of nuclear technology promoted, and how do poorer countries have access to the same technologies?
It's really interesting because indeed when you talk about nuclear users, peaceful users, people always think about nuclear energy, power generation, but there is so much more. It's indeed the medical applications. Who doesn't know anybody that's had radiation treatment, or in food security. The isotopes can be used for many different scientific methods of detecting material strength or where water has come from. And a lot of that work is done at the International Atomic Energy Agency in Vienna, which is an organization that the EU very strongly supports in many ways. So there's quite a lot of education also involved in setting the scenes, and the EU is very active in that. Now, I do think peaceful users have become much more important in the last 10 years, I think, especially as developing countries are using much more equipment for cancer treatment, for example. So I do expect this review conference to come up with some ideas how we can further promote peaceful uses worldwide.
So yeah, lots of challenges, as we were saying, Marilyn. But at the same time, are you hoping to get some kind of concrete outcome from this conference, positive outcome?
Absolutely, and that's what the EU is really working towards. We have 4 full weeks here in New York to discuss with all delegations on which areas we can agree for further work. And one area to highlight that has become much more topical recently is the area of risk reduction. How do we reduce the risks of an accidental use of nuclear weapons, or an unintended use of nuclear weapons, or stumbling into a nuclear arms race? This risk reduction is something that's very much on the table, and where I hope we can reach agreement, as well as on all the other topics of disarmament and non-proliferation and peaceful uses.
That's good. So we can end with a positive note. So it's not just a moment where you face a lot of challenges and you have to deal with sensitive issues like, as you were saying, Iran or North Korea, but even the impact of the war in Ukraine. But you also hope to move the agenda forward.
Absolutely.
And we count also on you, Selma, with all your followers, to explain to young people like you how important it is. And I guess you can also support the effort the European Union does in order to raise awareness also among youth about the important issues that we're faced with. So thank you very much, Marilyn. Good luck with your task here in New York. Thank you, Selma, for coming today. And to our viewers, this is EU Talks, and see you for our next episode.